There's a couple new projects these days using new technology, things like Oculus Rift and 3D glasses and that kind of thing to digitally explore outside spaces and that kind of thing. Do you think that has any, have you come across any of those?
No, I haven't.
Yeah,
but
Google's doing one right now. Where
why
they
am I not surprised?
Strap GoPros to like people who are kayaking and climbing mountains, and then you can like watch your 360 go along on the adventure, and like they're trying to introduce that as a, oh look, it's environmental education through technology. And I'm like, is it? I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on.
No. I have no words, in fact.
I know. I ordered. You can get these like Google glasses. They're like cardboard, and I ordered them just to kind of see what it was. And I mean, maybe as a teaching tool in classrooms, if you're never going to go to Antarctica, it's kind of cool. But like they're just taking you on like hikes and stuff. Just like you can Google Map and drive along on streets, you can now digitally hike trails. Why?
Oh my goodness. But see, for me, that's another example of displacement. Like, what is wrong with right here where we are?
Yeah.
Like, we have an amazing ecosystem right outside this building. We can just explore that. Like, just because Antarctica exists doesn't mean that we have to feel like we've been there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. To me, the experience you can get from technology about nature is never ever going to be the same as the experience you get from being in nature. Like, no matter how much innovation there is, it can't be the same because it's not the same. And yeah, it just makes me sad that people think that technology can replace what we already have.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I don't get it.
I know.
Wow.
It is. Travel always kind of interests me. The idea that because we have access to everywhere in the world, it almost becomes a sign of culture or a sign of achievement to have been to all these places. And I'm not a traveler, and I'm very much like a local traveler, but I'm not, like, I have no desire to go to Europe. And no, I just think it's I think you're right. It's just we feel like we have access to everything, and that whatever's over there is better than here just because it's over there.
Yeah.
And so we feel like we have to go there.
Yeah. And there's actually been studies done on, I mean, this is another version of the same thing, but studies done on teenagers that have cell phones and are at a party and find out that there are 4 other parties going on, and they're just paralyzed because they don't know which one to go to.
That's right.
But, I mean, if you're at a party, why don't you make the most of the one you're at? To me it feels like the same thing. It's this, who am I going to be tomorrow if I've gone to this party, and who am I going to be tomorrow if I've gone to this party? But it's all like future oriented, and I feel like that's a big problem. That's a big problem with our society, that we're future oriented. But what about who we are now, and where we are now, and the relationships with people right in front of us? To me, those are the most important things.
Absolutely. What about the idea that society overall is becoming disconnected from nature? Is that something that you also agree is true or is happening in society today?
I think that's an interesting one, and I've wrestled with myself with a lot about the language around that, because when I was writing the rewilding book, I kept thinking about people and nature, but actually they're not two separate things. Like, people are nature, and I think that's what we're forgetting. And so we can remove ourselves from the rest of nature, but it's really just a fallacy to say that we're actually outside of nature, because we are nature. And so when we forget that connection, it's like forgetting a part of ourselves. And yes, I absolutely think that we're forgetting that connection.
Yeah. So maybe not so much that we're disconnected from nature, but we're disconnected from the idea that we are part of nature.
Yes. Yeah.
And what do you think are the ramifications of that?
I think the environmental ramifications are huge, for the reason I was talking about earlier. Like, if we don't have a relationship with the rest of nature, why would we care what happens to it? And that's where the disconnect for me is phenomenal, because we depend on the rest of nature, like for everything from the air we breathe to the water we drink to the food we eat to the medications we take. Like, we are so deeply entwined with nature that we can't exist without it. And yet, if we tell ourselves the story that we are somehow outside of nature, then we're not looking after nature, and we're actually like cutting off. I mean, it's gruesome. It's a gruesome and probably a bad metaphor, but it's like cutting off a body part. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. So have you ever? Sorry, this is kind of, we've hopped around a little bit. We're gonna hop back a little bit to the pressures that society puts on you as a parent. Have you ever found yourself making a decision that you didn't necessarily agree with because you felt pressured to do so? Or have you ever thought, oh, maybe I should enroll her in a class, and done it just to be like, no, that wasn't actually what I wanted to do, but I felt like I was pressured to do so?
Not really, but I think that's mostly because we've made our life much more complicated than it needs to be. In the sense that we've built in these natural barriers between doing that kind of thing.
Right, like the lack of a car.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, we're fairly low income. We live in a small apartment. Like, we have all these natural kind of barriers that we've built for ourselves.
Right.
And sometimes they're really, really frustrating. But we've also put them there for a reason, because I don't want to be catapulting through my life at record speed. And so they're frustrating sometimes, but they're also very conscious. And I think for our family anyway, they're very healthy. And so because it would take a lot of extra effort to actually enroll her in whatever or be super busy, it's not just the extra effort of having to jump into a car and go somewhere. Right. It's like a lot of extra effort. And so, we haven't really fallen into that. I mean, sometimes there are certain months of the year where we're running around all over visiting people, but it's not like regular weekly activities where we get too busy. It's just realizing that actually we shouldn't have done 4 things this weekend. We should have just done 1, that kind of thing. But happily, because it's not something that we've paid for the next 6 months, it's easy to just say, okay, next weekend we're just doing 1 thing. Yeah,
that makes sense. Do you ever wish that you had more access to natural spaces than you do? Maybe because you don't have a car, for example, and can't.
Yeah.
Is that ever tempting enough that you consider removing one of those barriers, getting a vehicle, or is it just something that you work around in other ways?
Yeah, well, we're part of the car share, so we can borrow a car, but it's still that extra step. Because I mean, there are amazing parks around, and there's always an opportunity to go out into a natural space. It's just, I think basically it's keeping our schedule as clutter-free as possible, so that when we hit the weekend, we're actually calmed down enough to say, okay, we have 3 hours, let's go to a park. As opposed to saying, okay, we have 3 hours, we need to get the grocery shopping done and the vacuuming done and all that kind of stuff. So it's a mental shift that we need to make when we're not doing that.
So do you feel like us then that you're balanced enough, that you have enough access, that you're satisfied with it, even if it's maybe not the ideal amount of access?
Yeah.
Good. So this kind of, again, is a good segue into the last section, which is going to talk a little bit about challenges or barriers that you experience in terms of getting outside. So are there any significant challenges or barriers that you can identify in your life that do make it harder for you to get outside, either as much as you'd like or to specific places that you'd like?
I don't think so. I mean, the main barriers are us overscheduling ourselves, basically. So it's a mental barrier more than anything else.
But otherwise, you feel like in general you're able to accommodate whatever's going on in your life in order to. Now, do you prioritize in the sense that you're like, no, I'm going to let something else fall by the wayside because I want to go to the beach today, or is it just something that you're naturally able to work in? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's sunny, absolutely. Like, if it's a sunny day, everything else can fall by the wayside and we're going to the beach.
Absolutely. Do you ever find that a struggle, juggling multiple priorities or chores or grocery shopping or whatever else, and also trying to get outside?
Sometimes, but usually we make it work in some way. And I think another thing, I mean, this is my soapbox once again, I think being in a small apartment really encourages us to go outside, because at a certain point when you've been in